need water or otherwise require a short break to cool off, please do, throw up a hand and we can try and facilitate that because, challenging. Let's describe it as challenging to present in these conditions. I'm now going to pass over to Celeste to confirm apologies.
Thanks, Chair. We did receive apologies from Councillor Latif and Councillor Correa. Councillor Fry will be substituting for Councillor Correa. But yeah, I suspect he will join us at any minute now. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Miles told me yesterday she would be late because she's got childcare arrangement.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hamwood?
Chair, I'm substituting for Councillor Stairs.
Thank you very much. So, having dealt with apologies, we now move to declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest on any item on the agenda for today? I'm seeing none. So we shall move to Chair's announcement. I don't have any particular announcements, save to reorder our agenda slightly. Specifically, I suggest we reorder the agenda to take item 8 first, that is the domestic abuse policy for service users. And then we will move to item 7 and then item 9, dealing with substantive items first, before moving on to deal with the minutes, the work plan and future meetings. Is everyone happy with that proposed reordering? Thank you very much. In that case, we will now move to the first of our substantive items for today. That is our domestic abuse policy for service users. We have Councillor Arshad here in person. We also have Richard Adams here in person and Liz Jones as well. If you all would like to come to the front. And Councillor Arshad, when you're ready, please feel free to introduce the report.
Thank you very much, Chair. Oxford City Council is working towards achieving the Domestic Abuse Housing Alliance, DAHA, accreditation. So it's offering housing providers a framework and a benchmark for how they can respond effectively to domestic abuse. The Council will be assessed to ensure it meets the established standards and can effectively support survivors and children of domestic abuse and hold perpetrators to account. The domestic abuse policy for service users guides the decisions and actions the Council will take when responding to domestic abuse. So, as you can see in the report, there is only minor edits to this report, and it's highlighted in yellow and adds "and their children." So I just wanted to highlight that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Does Richard or Liz wish to add anything? Brilliant. Thank you very much. Thank you to Councillor Arshad, to Liz and to Richard for being here. I'll now open up the floor to questions in that case. Any questions from members? I will aim to take questions in banks of 3. Councillor Rotino first.
So it's obviously not, this is not about the policy, but in reality, in practice, could you maybe run us through a few scenarios of how you'd expect staff to respond? Say, for instance, I don't know, somebody from a localities team at a food bank meets somebody with a black eye and bruising on their arm, or we get a noise complaint and in it you just hear lots of screaming and shouting and threats to kill, or maybe I knock on a resident's door and they tell me they're being financially exploited by their son, but they don't want him to be homeless. Can you sort of run through some scenarios of what it would be in reality, as opposed to just the policy?
Thank you. Just if I could try and take 1 or 2 more questions and I'll come in batches if that's okay, just for efficient running. Any other questions people would like to raise at this point? Councillor Jarvis?
Thank you, yeah, and thank you for the report. Just had a couple of questions, again, slightly going beyond the sort of text of the report itself, but I guess when reading this, the context in which I was reading it was, in the wider context of temporary accommodation provision for the council and domestic abuse being a kind of one of the key reasons behind the increased use and pressure and provision around temporary accommodation. And so I guess my question really is, what confidence do we have that the current temporary accommodation provision that the council provides is adequate for dealing with instances of domestic abuse, and how effective are we at the moment at being able to move people on from temporary accommodation into a more permanent, stable accommodation environment going forward. And then the second question really is obviously the policy that is before us this evening is very much about what happens when we're responding to domestic abuse. And I wondered if you could comment at all about any work the council does around prevention of domestic abuse before it takes place, because that's obviously crucial.
Thank you very much. I'll go to Councillor Henwood and then I'll go for a round of answers.
Thank you, Chair. So I was reading the policy document, and it states that the policy doesn't cover children under the age of 16. But clearly there is a case where children are abused and are victims of domestic abuse. So could officers explain to me how that is processed? Is it via MASH? Do we use that, or is there another mechanism that we can use?
Thank you very much. I'll go back to Councillor Arshad and the officer team for a round of responses.
Thank you very much for the questions. I will start with Councillor Tino's question, which is giving a few examples of how we might respond. If anybody, we do have people, in fact, we're seeing a big increase of people coming to us saying they're experiencing domestic abuse. So, for example, they might contact the contact centre about a reason they're phoning up about something, but they disclose that there's domestic abuse. The contact centre will then automatically send a report to Safer Oxford, which is run by my team and is for the community safety team. We will make contact with the person. We've got in a way that we think is safe. So we might just send a text and say, hi, from City Council, just wanted to catch up with you after, so that in case their partner knows. I'm going into a lot of detail, I'll try not to. But what we would do is we would take that on. We would do a risk assessment, see what risk level they are, and then make a decision on what happens next. So if they're high risk, it will go to a thing called MATAC, which is a multi-agency risk assessment conference. If they're medium risk, we will make referrals to our Oxfordshire Domestic Abuse Services and standard as well. So we would look at their needs. So each case is very individual. So that's in a way, that's almost what we would be doing in almost any team. They would come to my team, because we have a number of people who are highly trained on domestic abuse and who can respond and complete the risk assessments effectively without re-traumatising a victim. Does that help? Our role, because we're not a support service, we're not expected that we would then carry that case forward. We'd make sure they receive the right support for them. And it goes into the children's one as well, if there are children, we will make a referral to MASH when there's children involved, because they're the most appropriate agency to deal with that situation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I believe
Just answering my question.
And Councillor Jarvis, are you happy your question was answered?
I don't think it was, yeah.
Yes, so if we could also, sorry, I appreciate it's difficult sometimes going through the batches of three. It's supposed to allow us to move promptly, but if we could go back for Councillor Jarvis's question.
And your question was around temporary accommodation and do we manage, yes? Okay, so through the DAHA, we've changed the process really. So if somebody approaches the City Council through the housing teams to say, I am fleeing domestic abuse, or I'm considering fleeing from domestic abuse, that their triage team automatically contact us again. We contact the person and then help them do a risk assessment, find out what their needs. Now, when it goes to coming into temporary accommodation, so sometimes it's emergency accommodation, which might be a hotel, because as we know, we're in a housing crisis. We might be offer them a refuge. What we do make sure is that they have the say in what they want to do. Gone are the days where if you say, I'm a victim of domestic abuse, the only place you can go is refuge. That does not suit most people. And it means taking them from their homes, from their security, from their friendships, from their schools, from their works, and they're having to uproot with just a couple of bags in them. So we don't do that in the City Council anymore, but we do make it an option that they can have because they need to make that decision. So when they go into temporary accommodation, what happens is that through our team, we're very fortunate that we have access to police systems. Currently we don't, but generally we do, police systems. So we can assess the risk. We obviously, we're antisocial behaviour. My team do the antisocial behaviour, high-end antisocial behaviour. So we will check all our systems, including where there's been previous work done around domestic abuse. Look at the neighbourhood to see if there is that people are moving into, if there's any history of something that might make them more vulnerable to being abused. Generally, they're not with their partners at this point. But sometimes that cycle just keeps going round. It's quite hard for people to eventually get away from their abusers, but most people do eventually. So we will check and make sure that they're secure. Now, we have the sanctuary scheme, and I will praise my sanctuary scheme coordinator because I would think we're the best practice nationally for our sanctuary scheme. She will go around and she will make sure that the house is target hardened so that it's safe and secure for the family that goes in there, a non-abusive parent and the children. So that's all free of charge. Safety planning advice is given, making sure that they are hooked into community groups, into any support services they might need. Again, it's on a case-by-case basis. We might look for getting them some additional furniture or some help or food bank or anything like that. So we can put them in temporary accommodation safely and then moving on. As they're a priority following the 2021 Domestic Abuse Act, we do move our domestic abuse victims fairly quickly because of the situation they're in, but we always assess the risk wherever we're moving them to. Now, we can't mitigate every risk, but we can do the best we can. But of course, we make sure that they have that facility as well to where they report and how they report. And we won't go away. They can come back to us as many times as they need to. But again, I will highlight, we're not actually a support organisation. The other thing we'll do is that Christine does this, my sanctuary scheme coordinator, is we have sometimes it's too hard to stay in a particular property. So she will take it to our exceptional circumstances panel. We've got a separate one for domestic abuse cases, so it's really understood. And we've got a level, a standard for each banding. And they will be given a banding. Usually it's higher than a 3. It's a 3, 2 or a 1, depending on the situation, so that they can get moved quickly. And again, the new house would be target hardened. So we do a follow through. We try our very best to make sure that they live safe lives.
Thank you very much. Any more questions from colleagues? I certainly have one, but I want to see if there's any more. Councillor Kim?
Thank you for that. That's really interesting, especially about the housing. Sorry about that. I just said thank you so much for your answers, and particularly to the last answer that you gave. Just out of curiosity, how long on average does the triage take from if someone were to contact you with children to say that they're facing domestic violence? How long does it take the triage on average from them contacting your teams or a council team, from them getting emergency housing? Is it the same day or just roughly?
Emergency housing, same day.
Okay.
So, and again, you know, we might have some caveats on certain ones, but yes, it's the same day. And we also, once we know, we get notified that somebody has said they're disclosing, we will try and contact them exactly on the same day. It doesn't always work because they can't answer the phone. It might be the next day, but we don't give up until we try and get hold of them. So.
Thank you very much. So I had one question, which is based on sort of page 55 to 56. You obviously list there some of the diversity considerations, and I can see there you've included the fact that vulnerable immigration status may result in someone being greater risk of domestic abuse. So I guess my first question on that is sort of what protections are in place if someone comes forward with a vulnerable immigration status to disclose domestic abuse, to reassure them about what information may or may not be passed on to, for example, Home Office services? I appreciate there's a bunch of legal ramifications at play on the council there, but it'd be really useful to have some information on that, because obviously it massively affects people's willingness to come forward for support. And related to that, just within these causes, I mean, this might be something I want to come back to in recommendations, but I just wonder whether there's been any consideration of explicitly recognising how immigration control can itself be a barrier to people coming forward and therefore increase vulnerability. Thank you.
Thank you for asking me that question. Yes, in fact, we're writing a process now for our housing teams, and we're going to be talking them through it. So if somebody comes and they have no recourse to public funds and fleeing domestic abuse, and quite often English, they don't really speak English, they've been isolated, etc. We have, through refugee resource, we've got sanctuary hosting. So they will provide, and that's only if they haven't got children. So if it's a single female or a single male, males are victims as well, but it's generally females, then we can get them into sanctuary hosting. They are then hosted until they get the domestic violence concession, which I know has just changed its name, but it's gone out of my head now. But it's the domestic violence concession. Once they have that, then they have the leave to remain, and then they have to apply for the indefinite leave to remain. So it is a bit of a process. I think that because we're moving into hosting, because we can move them into refuge once they've got that leave to remain, because then they're able to get some benefits. So refuges around the country, we will already be looking, well, the Asylum Welcome will be looking for the refugees around the country, and the Oxfordshire Domestic Abuse Service, so they work hand in hand with them. I've had a conversation with our modern day slavery coordinator yesterday about this very topic, because we also have people who are forced into marriage, have come over here, etc. So we've been looking at the NRM pathway for modern slavery, and how that would fit and what we can do to support people through that. In that way, that's almost just a one-stop shop for the people, which in some ways is a lot better. It's one of the hardest things I think every local authority has to face, is when we have people no recourse. Very few refuges give it without having some, getting leave to remain, getting the concession. But there are some, but again, they are pretty much bed blocked. So it is a very tough one. But we also think there's probably more out there, but we just don't hear because they don't go out. They're locked in their properties. And I think that was a question you asked about prevention, wasn't it? Prevention is a key to all of this. So I sit on the strategy group for domestic abuse, and there's a whole working group around prevention. And that's about raising awareness, etc. It's about going into schools. It's about trying to change attitudes around females, misogynistic attitudes. So part of that, there's a lot of work that goes through. It used to be called Oxford Against Cutting. It's now called Sundial. And if you don't know that organisation, it's amazing. They do a lot of work in schools around this type of thing. So it's about how do we raise awareness of this quiet. And I think part of that is the more we raise people's awareness of being curious about their neighbours, the better. So it's a slow burn, unfortunately, because it's not something you see every day. But we're working more with Asylum Welcome, Refugee Resource, and I'm working with Lucy Nichols on the City of Sanctuary as well, to see what else we can do to start raising that with community groups, etc. But we have to be very careful that it's a very sensitive subject, but also one that can be easily corrupted, shall we say. And I mean that not in a horrible way. So there is a lot of work that we're now pushing forward on this, because we do think it's a very serious issue.
Thank you very much. And yeah, if I could just commend everything you said there, it's really, really positive to hear that, particularly the work with the third sector organisations, because as you'll appreciate, approaching any public authority when you have precarious status is an incredibly daunting experience. So thank you very much. Councillor Cahan?
Okay, thank you for that. Yeah, that is really amazing, the work that you do there. Just to clarify, the process of them getting leave to stay or to remain and stuff, with the legal fees, because I know they're quite high and the process is really difficult, the legal process. Do you guys or the charity organisations such as Asylum Welcome help them with their legal fees, or do you just signpost them to the right resources? Like, how does that work?
The Home Office.
The home, okay, so you signpost them to the Home Office.
Well, the concession is you get that through the Home Office.
Okay, I see.
Ironically, because people are very nervous about going to the Home Office, but that's where the concession, getting that, and then with that comes some money to help with but you have to have an immigration lawyer, and unfortunately the waiting time for Turpin and Miller is quite long, so they've now said that you can have immigration specialists, which we have got them. So in the NRM there's some of those, and they've got some as well in Refugee Resource and Asylum Welcome. So it's sort of making it a little bit easier. But you're right, getting funding to pay for lawyers is difficult, but the government will pay to start with for a short period.
Thank you. Any other questions colleagues wish to raise? Seeing none, shall we move towards making recommendations? Are there any recommendations that colleagues had in mind for this item? I probably do have one which I'd like to propose in that case, which is effectively, in terms of that diversity section, I wonder if we could make a recommendation that there is explicit recognition of the way in which national immigration policy makes people less likely to disclose domestic violence. I think as a council of sanctuary, having that in our policy would be extremely valuable and would be a real statement of the ways in which national policy can harm the efforts of local authorities to create inclusive and safe communities. And would there be a second for that recommendation?
Yep.
Thank you, Councillor Rowley. We are happy to adopt that. Brilliant. Thank you, everyone. So we'll make that as one of our recommendations. Are there any other recommendations anyone should raise? Councillor Henwood?
Noted in the report that the instances of male domestic abuse is quite low, and I'm just wondering whether there's a reluctance to come forward and whether any work around that in promoting male domestic abusees in order to come forward or not, if there's any work that can be done there.
Could we maybe just have a response? What do you think there's any possible work we could be doing in that area?
There is a lot of work being done in this area, so I'm glad you brought it up. Both of our domestic abuse services have always supported male victims. And you're right, they do not come forward. And part of that is because they have their own stereotypical view of what a male should and shouldn't be. So Oxfordshire Domestic Abuse Service, their service manager is also a male, Shujat, and he's been doing a lot of work with males to improve their response and how they can encourage more men to come forward when they're experiencing domestic abuse. Now, they might experience it in a different way from females. It doesn't have to be that it's exactly the same, but they're very committed and they're setting up they want to find a way that men will, and that they're doing that work. It's ongoing at the moment, but I should imagine it's near to finishing. He's been doing it for about 9 months, I think, finding out the best way to do this.
Which I don't think there's a need to raise an action on that. I think it's been covered.
Thank you very much. And again, really great to hear of the work that you're doing on this. Are there any other items members wish to raise? In that case, I think we will thank you all for your time. Thank you for the sort of detailed answers you've given today. It's been really good to hear of some of the work in this area. And thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
We will now move to what was originally listed as item 7, which is our tourism item. And for this item, we have Councillor Hollingsworth and Diana Fawcett. And I believe we also have, do we have Clive on Zoom?
I don't believe so.
Okay, then we have Councillor Hollingsworth and Diana Fawcett. Councillor Hollingsworth, when you're ready, you may introduce the report.
Apologies. apologies. It's quite warm outside and I'm displaying the fact I grew up 2 miles from the North Sea. And this is quite toasty and warm from my background. This is a broad brush report because, you know, we were asked to bring something to you on tourism. There are a lot of things on tourism, and rather than sort of disappear into the details, we thought we'd do a broad brush type thing. I will go through it and pick out any particular elements, and obviously please ask questions. I think what I would say as a sort of starting point is that Oxford and Oxfordshire are places that are popular to be visited by people from all over the world, which is a good thing. It comes with benefits and it comes with challenges. I think if we went back, as some of us would be around when the council looked at this, so before COVID, but just before COVID, so 2019, 2018, 2019, something of that sort, when the average visit by a tourist to Oxford was 45 minutes and spending nothing. You would arrive in your bus, you would get out, you would take some photos and you get back in your bus. And so no business would benefit from it. And, you know, no community would particularly benefit from it. Be some nice photos, but there we were. And what we said at that time, and this is backed up by evidence which came from applicants, with people with planning applications looking for hotels, was we have a calamitous shortage we had at the time of hotels at every level, from the very posh down to the very affordable. That has been changed a lot, and I think that's a really positive thing. So instead of people coming for 45 minutes, they now stay overnight. They go to the theatre, they go for a meal, they go to a show, you know, they go into a little museum like the one in this building, you know, they go and walk around the markets and things, get their lunch at Gloucester Green and all those sort of things, all of which are really positive things, and go beyond the city centre, which of course those 45-minute visitors never did. But there are still challenges facing us from tourism, and I guess we'd most like to hear from Scrutiny as to what you think we should be doing. We're happy to advise on technical stuff like legislation that might come up.
I fear it might, yes. Diana, do you want to, I believe you have a presentation today.
Yeah, we had suggested to Celeste that, oh yeah, well done, fantastic. We thought it might be really useful. We know that you've all been sent the presentation, but we thought it might be useful just to sort of do some of the padding out behind some of the detail behind that. So we're presenting this evening on the impact of tourism and potential funding routes, and you've heard from Alex. So here are some statistics. I won't read through every one. The statistics are generally about a year behind, so we're just gathering 2024 from our colleagues in Experience Oxfordshire at the moment, but it certainly backs up what Alex has just been saying about the popularity of Oxford. And we are a global city with an international reputation. We're always going to be a pull to our tourists, both locally and internationally. And those are the figures. And in fact, I would optimistically say that 2024 saw an even bigger boom for us. For those of you that walk around the city, you're going to have to see the sheer numbers. And we certainly heard from Experience Oxfordshire that some of the overseas countries that were reluctant to return, North America and Asia, have started to come back en masse. So tourism really popular in Oxford. Thank you, Celeste. But with every tourism, there's an impact, and you're probably seeing more and more internationally about the impact of tourism. And instead of people going and having experiences, it's almost like a tick-off list now. And you might have seen the recent Airbnb advert that actually says, instead of it being a tick-off list, and that's exactly what it's become. Since COVID, they're more aware of the mortality and they want to get out. And I thought some of these pictures were quite upsetting really in many ways, because you can see what's happening across Europe. So the biggest picture is actually the square in Venice. And I think all of you imagine when you go to Venice, you're going to stand there putting your arms out with the pigeons on it. Well, you can see your arms aren't going anywhere in that square. And the Great Wall of China, they shuffle along. It's not empty. You are surrounded by thousands of people. And there's an image of Benidorm. So we are not the only city that's being inundated with tourism. It's happening across Europe and across wider. And of course, it's a great thing that we have our tourists, but it does have an impact on the city. So we've been looking at what we can achieve in terms of funding to deliver some of our tourism related issues. And there is no funding for the key projects that have been identified in the City Centre Action Plan that was adopted in 2021 and the Destination Management Plan that was adopted in 23, which looked at Oxford and Oxfordshire. Lots of great recommendations for managing and attracting tourism, but actually there's no funding for it. So why do we really care? Because it's not really just about our tourists, it's about anybody who uses the city. So whether you live here, whether you work here, whether you're a student here, as well as a tourist, we want to improve that experience because sometimes that experience can be quite bad. We want to improve dwell time. So Alex has already spoken about pre-COVID, dwell timing 45 minutes. But I'm sure you've all seen on a Saturday morning in St Giles when there's lots of coaches and there are hundreds of people following an umbrella. In fact, I've seen it this morning, and they're whizzing around the city en route to somewhere else, and the economic benefit is low. And we really need to be looking at the whole tourism, the overnight stays, as well as the day visitors. And of course, with any hospitality industry, you're going to have peaks and troughs. So during the summer and certain peak times, we've got great occupancy in our hotels, but like everywhere, you have those troughs. And that creates employment issues because you're then more likely to have people on 0 hours contracts. So it has a real economic disadvantage to our city by not levelling out those tourism. And it's really important to us that we create that more stable employment. Thank you. So we've been exploring an accommodation business improvement district. We can only be the facilitators in it because we are not the levy payers, and we'll come on to that more in detail. But a business improvement district at the moment is the only form of legislation that exists in England to collect something equivalent to what you might see when you're abroad. So at the moment, if you go abroad, you'll very often see on your hotel bills, tourism tax. It's in 75 European cities now. It's the norm. A lot of our visitors are paying that already. But in England, we don't have that. So we have to distinguish the tourism tax is different to the legislation that does allow us to collect a fee on room rates, and that is called an accommodation business improvement district. So the ones that have gone live at the moment are Manchester and Liverpool more recently, and there are 20 other places within England looking at using accommodation business improvement district. And for us, it started that exploration about how can we facilitate our levy payers, so the accommodation providers, what should the room charge be per night? What hotels should it cover? It is subject to a ballot by levy payers. I have to really stress that it is not a city council project. We are just facilitating this because we actually think it's a darn good opportunity to raise some really important funds for our city. The council cannot decide if the ABID goes ahead. So all we can do is facilitate that process and look at that process. And we can't even decide how the money's spent, but we can present options. We can help and facilitate the process. And it's really important to note under existing legislation, it cannot be spent on council services. So at this point, it's probably worthwhile being aware of the greater terminology of tourism tax. You'll hear it being spoken about in Scotland for Edinburgh, and Edinburgh are looking at bringing in a tourist tax from 2026 that will be used to backfill predominantly council services, with some money being spent on promotion, but also on housing, because in Edinburgh, they've got such a proliferation of second homes and homes being used to let to tourists that it's creating a real housing issue. So in Scotland, they'll bring that in 2026. Wales are looking at bringing in a tourism tax in 2027. But at this stage, it's really vague about what they're looking to spend it on, but it could be the impact of tourism. So rather than backfilling council services, has a slightly different agenda. In England at the moment, there has been talk about the preparation of a white paper, but that hasn't come to fruition. Current government's objectives have moved the agenda of tourism tax slightly lower. We're not expecting to hear anything in this current term of government, but it may be in 6 or 7 years' time that things do develop. And the current thinking is that if that does happen, it will be given to the mayoral authority. So, which in effect for Oxford could mean that our serviced accommodation providers that having a charge in terms of tourism tax, that money is then spent elsewhere. It's not being directly benefited for Oxford City centre. So it gives us a really unique small window of opportunity to create some funds for the city. Thank you. We've looked at other funding options. We've looked at a variety of business improvement district models, and we're not ruling that out. And it may be that some of the funding, if we do go down the ABID route, that we can ring fence some of that to explore getting consultants in to look at business improvement districts. We've looked at sponsorship, but its very nature, it's so erratic. It always feels like the panacea to achieving things, but sponsorship, particularly in the current business climate, is very, very difficult. And as we've already mentioned, English government is under increasing pressure to start looking at a tourism tax. So we've done some indicative work just to understand what, if we were to go down that funding route, what the figures could look like. But I have to stress this would be down to the task group, which we'll come on to, which will be the levy payers. But in terms of hotel numbers, we're looking at approximately 2,300 hotel numbers based on an occupancy of 75%. That's rather conservative. We suspect the occupancy is a lot higher. We're also looking at potentially a £2 a night visitor charge. So that's not £2 per person, that's £2 per room. It's a very, very low impact. We've then looked at rateable value and minimum number of rooms, just to give us a rough idea. And there are 29 accommodation providers that fall in that. And if they were to vote to go ahead, they could raise 1.3 million per annum over a 5-year period. So considering, remember the previous slide, that there is currently no income and funding for city centre projects over and above what the council provides, this could be a really important revenue stream of approximately 7 million over 5 years. Thank you. And then on top of that, we've also been looking at the college numbers. So college is a bit more difficult because obviously we're not going to penalise students. So that takes 8 months of the available occupancy out. But you're looking at 8,000 rooms. So remember, hotel rooms are 2,300. We're talking about a lot of rooms in here. And again, we've looked at rateable value and a minimum number of rooms, a £2 potentially a night charge, but it's something the colleges could decide if they went down that route. And that would be an additional 1.2 million on top of the hotel rate. So suddenly you're potentially looking at well in excess of 10 million over 5 years. If you box clever with it, you can do a lot with that money. Okay, thank you. They could, sorry, thank you. It's absolutely right to correct me on that. Yeah, no, you're right. I'm talking about collectively we, but you're absolutely correct. I should be speaking in terminology of the council. So what are our next actions? It's actually to set up a tourism task group with the hoteliers looking at what kinds of projects that they would be interested in funding, what's important to them, and analysing some of those numbers in a bit more detail. We would then do the same with the colleges. We would run them concurrently. But we're sort of indicatively hearing that the college projects may be different to the hoteliers. So we'd have to run 2 consecutive task groups with an overarching group to make sure that we don't have any duplication. But again, just to stress, we are facilitators. We cannot vote on projects and we cannot vote at the ballot if that is a route that the task groups choose to go down. So once those projects have been identified, and bearing in mind we have those indicative numbers, so we know broadly what sort of money that we're playing with, they will then work out what projects they would like funded. There'll be a whole governance process around that, and the projects will be very smart. So they'll have very clear definitions, and it would be managed and set up by an independent company if they decided to go down the ABID route. Now, they may decide the ABID route isn't the right time. It's a really challenging climate out there now for hospitality. This process has taken us a bit longer than we would have liked, but it's because we're navigating a very uncertain hospitality landscape. We know that some cities have rushed into this and then the ballot has failed. And then once you've failed, it's really difficult to recover from that position. So we're bringing them on that journey. We want them to take ownership of this. We want them to be part of it so that we can create a really successful outcome for our tourists, our residents and our students. And that's it. Back to you to summarise, I guess.
So I think you'd have heard it is they who will make the decisions. So the decision about whether to have an ABID at all, and then the decision about what to do with the money that it may or may not raise. We can help though, and this is the crucial bit, is to help them see the benefits of going down the ABID route. So that's about building partnership, building trust Inevitably, we're talking about a range of businesses and a range of non-businesses, given the peculiarity of the fact that we've got the colleges. So reassuring some about doubts, talking to those who are more enthusiastic, and how best they can convey that to the more sceptical people. So we're trying to facilitate, trying to bring people together. And I think to really emphasize that point, the tourism tax thing, which is talked about, is years and years off if it ever happens. This is the only option in town if we want to see money raised from tourism accommodation in Oxford and then spent on supporting tourism in Oxford, because that is what we're talking about. And so I think our consensus position, at least we haven't fallen out about it yet, is that I would much rather take time to get this right and to get to a point where there is a support from the decision makers, which we are not, which is not what has happened in a couple of other places where they've rushed, as you said, straight into a decision. They've lost the vote because they didn't bring people with them. And as a result, it's wasted time, effort, money, and probably means that they're going to have to go further back to try and build up those relationships again. Because if a vote happens and it goes the wrong way, people lose trust with each other, with the authority, with everyone else. So yeah, I'd rather pause and work. The moment how to put this politely, the change of the American president in January and the effect that has had on some of the companies which have got American, for example, hotels, suddenly they've lost swathes of their visitors. And of course, some of those companies also own hotels here. So suddenly there's a whole load of financial pressure on the European arms of American companies, and that's a problem. So, we have to appreciate that as a reality. It wasn't necessarily one that when we were talking about ABIDs back in, when was it, August, September last year, we assumed that that sort of thing would happen. But, there we are.
Thank you both for bringing this to us today. It's very, very interesting to hear about sort of what options we have open to us. I'm sure you're aware that it's been raised by Scrutiny previously and by a number of councillors, the sort of urgency of having something in place to address the impact of tourism on the city. As valuable as it is, obviously it does have impacts on various services. We'll go to a round of questions. I'm sure many members will have questions. I'll try for 3 at a time. So I'll go to Councillor Kayham, Councillor Fry and Councillor Henwood, and then I'll go for another round once we've had some responses.
Thank you, and thanks for a really interesting presentation. I've got 3 quick questions. The first one is, from 2023, we had a 7% increase in visitor trips from the year before. Do you know how much of a percentage increase that was before COVID? Doesn't matter if you don't. And then also, what was my second? Also, you mentioned that tourism is good, but of course it has its impacts. Could you just mention some of the more negative impacts that it has in Oxford specifically, just really broadly? And just a comment to end with. I think the ABID sounds great. Of course, you do have to be very careful with it, like Alex said, but especially for, I think, colleges who have swells of summer schools and conferences, especially during the summer, and who do bring a lot of the visitors in. I think it sounds a really good way forward. But yeah, thank you.
I think Councillor Fry will take your questions as well.
I'll use the same one. I have really one question. You mentioned with sadness that the city centre action plan cannot be funded, at least from the city budget. Is it likely that an ABID would be able to pick it up?
And Councillor Henwood, if you want to ask your question as well, then we'll go for a round of answers.
Yeah, mine's a little bit more simpler. So I'm struggling on the definition of a tourist. And I note that the levy that's being proposed is aimed at tourists, but those people coming here on business trips, do we know what percentage of that total is on business and which are actually tourists, or are they clustered together in some form? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. We'll go for a round of answers.
I think we'll do the factual one to start with, because I think we know what our collective answer is, that they are brought together. There is no differentiation, and I'm not aware of the split. I imagine it's something that any more in-depth research could potentially draw out, but I mean, I think there's always an overlap between the two. So should we cover that one off?
Yeah, we do have the facility under the ABID constitution to actually delve a bit deeper into some of these things. So if the hotels decided that for a particular reason they wanted to exclude business trips and there was a way of capturing that, they do have the facility to do that. So
I think that's where I was going.
Yeah. Yeah.
Good. I like it when we predict ahead and answer a question you haven't even said yet. 7% change numbers. Do we have that background information from pre-COVID?
I'm sure we can get it.
Okay. So no, but
Not now.
we will. So I'll do a starting response, and then we'll sort of share it between us on two other ones, which is the negative consequences and the city centre action plan, because they are quite sort of broad brush things. So starting with the negative consequences, there are a range of negative consequences. I mean, some of them are, quite sort of observable in the sense of transport impacts. I mean, anyone who complains about St Giles will see that as a problem. Anyone trying to walk up a pavement when they literally can't fit on it, that is a problem. There are knock-on consequences in residential areas. Certainly my ward would fall very categorically into that. I suspect the other Alex's will to a certain extent. It's around the city centre wards. You can see this quite clearly. What used to be a little key safe used to tell you where the older people lived who needed social welfare support. Doesn't tell you that anymore. Tells you where the short-term lets are, and they are very substantial in number in the central parts of the city. So that is a fundamental challenge where I think the resolution that we would be looking for is twofold. One, to have more hotels, which we're doing, and we're beginning to see that as a real positive because that helps people stay overnight. And the other thing is, if I was asking for the government to do one piece of tourism legislation, it would be to allow areas that are affected by an excessive number of short-term lets to introduce the kind of limits like we have on HMOs in this city. Places like us, Bristol, Bath, the whole of Cornwall, North Norfolk, where I grew up, all of these need this, and they need it really much now. Anyway, so that was a slight sidetrack. They didn't get anywhere near city centres. So I will start on the city centre action plan because I think it helps pick up some of those negative consequences. So the kinds of things which I would hope that if the ABID went ahead, we could, I suppose, make a good advert for to the ABID decision makers, and they'd go, that's a good idea. Things around information are really crucial, and not just a little bit of a map or something, or the list of things to go to. In a world where lots of people use their phone to navigate round, intelligent information which maybe said, yeah, there's 20 places in, say, Oxford you could go to, but most of you are going to 2 of them. What about the other 18? This place. And you can actually, and I've seen this done in other cities in Europe. I should declare a slight interest. It was researched by someone who's doing a PhD at the same time as I was, and I was a lot more interested in her PhD than I was in mine. What you can do is you can say, we're overcrowded in this area. We can be really pushing people towards this area because look, there's only 3 people in that beautiful square on that side of the city centre, or whatever it might be. You can start to do intelligent things which encourage people to go to places they're not currently thinking of going to because they're just following, everyone else. So there's a whole swathe of interesting things you could do around information that are creative, and I would look at that. There's a whole load of things about investing in repair and maintenance issues, we'd have to be very careful to say those are clearly not council funded things, but enhancements that would go beyond what a council would do. So it wouldn't be council funding, but that would rank pretty high, I think, in what you'd want to see, not just in the city centre, but more broadly. Right, that was my bit.
I think Alex has cleared off most of it actually,
Sorry.
but no, it's great, thank you. I think there's something really important around governance as well for the task group. So we already have some established pieces of information, both in the city centre action plan, but also the destination management plan. So one of our processes will be to make sure that the governance of those meetings has that information presented. So they have an opportunity to look at everything in the city centre action plan, and they might decide, you know, there are other things in the city centre action plan that they'd like to fund in addition to the things that we've described. And de facto, everyone will benefit. So any improvements to the city aren't just going to benefit those visiting. It's going to benefit the people who live here. It's going to benefit the people who work here, and it's going to benefit the students. So everybody's a winner. And then as part of that governance, we would be bringing in the destination management plan and seeing if there's projects done in there. You know, these are really important pieces of work that have been done by consultants. So it's very important for us that we present them to the task groups for their consideration. And then as part of that, we'll also be looking to get feedback from residents about what they would like to see funded, so that can be presented to the groups as well. Would also like to talk to other stakeholders to see whether there are, you know, some big organisations in the city that have some really good ideas about how we can improve it. For us, this is a real good example of public and private sector working at its best. We can't solve these tourism issues on our own. That's why looking at the projects collectively with the hotels and colleges, even if we don't get to deciding an ABIT ballot, just looking at the issues and starting to understand them is a process we've never done before. So I think governance is really important to achieve that outcome.
Thank you very much. Are there any other colleagues wishing to raise questions? I have actually quite a few, but I will ask one and then I will go to Councillor Ottino and Councillor Mundy. So I guess the first question I wanted to, you've already used the word enhancement, but I was just wondering, what is the scope of not spent on council services? Do we mean there in terms of can't go directly into council budget, but could be used on infrastructure, like, for example, I mean, Councillor Hollingsworth and I have been bothering him about public toilets in Cowley Road. Can it be used on things like public toilets? Can it be used on things like the covered market, where a lot of council spend goes? Or is that completely out of the question in the way it's funded? I guess I just want some clarity on what we mean by enhancements here and where the limits and lines actually are, because obviously those sorts of improvements are often going to be actually on council, potentially on council-owned property, even if it's not directly on council spending. And I think there's a distinction maybe to be teased out there, and depending on what the legislation allows. I'll go to Councillor Ottino there.
Yeah, I was going to ask about this sort of admin costs to us. Clearly there are some because you're here. How do we, given that we're not getting the money, how do we keep a limit on that? And also about communication, how do we let people that perhaps live in my ward or Northfield Brook, a long way away from the city centre, feel that there's anything in this for them, that they're going to get some benefits, and it's not a case of their city centre sort of being taken over by other people, and there being a loss of things that they want to see in the city centre, and it all being for, you know, all being for tourists. Yeah, how do we communicate that, and how do we sort of encourage the hoteliers to think about some of those other people who may well be working for them, I guess, but are put off by coming to city centre, and it just the danger of it reinforces that them and us thing that we see in the city. And I suppose, but yeah, the last question was about these 29 hotels you said. I mean, are any of them hotels that we actually use ourselves, and people like probation and social services use to put people up at short notice in emergencies? And just want to make sure we're not paying the tourist tax for that reason.
I'll go to Councillor Mundy and then we'll go for a round of answers. And Councillors, I see you as well. I'll probably come to you in the next round, if that's okay.
Okay, so on this accommodation BID, is there likely to be a kind of cost impact on visitors who are staying over? Obviously, we've talked already about, and you've said obviously in the summary, about how we struggle to get overnight stays basically. So, you know, is there a risk of kind of putting people off coming for an overnight stay if it's making staying over more expensive? And obviously with it being a flat rate, you've suggested £2. £2 if you're staying at the Randolph for £290 a night isn't going to make that much difference. But if it's more like 50 or 60 quid, it's going to sort of percentage-wise going to make a big difference. Does it have to be a flat rate? Is that really the most sensible way of doing it? In so much as the impact on people who are coming to stay. You also talked about diversifying the kind of tourist offer that there is in Oxford. So it would be nice if we had like a beautiful square that nobody knew about, but I don't think we do. So people are flocking to these stunning places. You know, are there sort of like untouched parts of the city that we could be doing more to not just promote, but also beautifying in their own way, and perhaps taking advantage of some of these things that happen? You know, sometimes on social media, people have a bit of a buzz about something, and it might seem like it doesn't really amount to much, but those sorts of things can be exploited in a way, in a positive way, to encourage people to come visit an area. And it could just be an art installation. It could be, you know, anything like that. And it could be sort of pop-up stuff that's a little bit more kind of outside the box kind of stuff. And then I've got two more questions. So obviously we've got a bit of an issue with sort of retail unit space in the city centre. It's fair to say, you know, you still get a lot of people coming to the covered market, which is brilliant. It's always been good to see the commitment of the council to ensuring that that's got longevity and it continues to thrive and improve. And obviously we all know that loads of people sort of flocked to the Westgate, and that was really a huge project that brought in a lot of visitors. It can feel like some streets are quite neglected, including streets that have historically been really important for sort of retail use in the city centre. So what are we doing to improve those streets and ensure that, you know, those visitors who aren't coming are not just sort of seeing, you know, a once grand street that's, you know, rather sort of down in its luck and has got empty units and candy shops and stuff. And then my final question is that obviously for those working in tourism, it is a notoriously poorly paid industry to work in. So what are we doing to ensure that, you know, those people who are working in the tourism sector are, you know, being commensurately rewarded for the work that they do, are given a wage that ensures that they can live in Oxford? And obviously we all know that we've already got the Oxford living wage that we're promoting. So what are we doing to ensure that we're getting more of our hoteliers and then the colleges as well, of course, to actually pay the living wage to those who are working in tourism? Thank you.
We'll go for a round of answers there, please.
Okay. I made it 8 questions, but I might have miscounted. I will touch on a couple. And I'll start with that what does not council mean? Yeah, it's a good question, and like pretty much everything in any English definition of the English law, it's fuzzy around the edges. So what you cannot do, you absolutely cannot do, is go, we were spending 10,000 a year on, you know, maintaining toilets in the city centre. Well, we don't have to do that anymore. We can just get it from this. That will not work. That will not cut it. So you can't do that. What you could theoretically do, and I'd pick about street furniture for this. There's probably some minimum standards which are council requirements. So if there's a trip hazard, then that's the council's problem. The council has to deal with it, and you can't take money from somewhere else. It's your money, council's money. If, on the other hand, we were talking about, say, directional signs, which are not a requirement, but an option, then that potentially, with a bit of a thought through, could fit in. So it's things like that. It's thinking about things which are definitely not a requirement and a legal requirement on the council. That is completely unacceptable. But things that are around the edges, around improvements. So information, signage, might be potentially some elements of lighting, things like that. Certainly looking for you know, ways of directing people to whether they're currently secret squares hidden away somewhere in Oxford we just can't think of. So that would be my definition of that. So I think there is scope, you just have to be thoughtful and creative about it. But there are plenty of things which this council probably would have thought about doing 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, and has long since ceased to do, unless some pot of money is found and then it's a one-off and then it doesn't happen again. Those, I think, would fall within. And those are the kinds of things, I mean, you'd know more than me on what Liverpool are looking at, for example. It'd be interesting to see what they're doing, and Manchester as well. A couple of other things on the communication point, and this sort of, how does one present tourism? I mean, where I said to you, I grew up quite near the North Sea. That's North Norfolk. North Norfolk, I can tell you, when I was a kid, I played football for my primary school against village primary school for pretty much every village in the vicinity. Every single one of those, bar one, schools has gone. And one of the ones I used to play against is because 70 or 80% of the houses in the village are now holiday houses. There's nobody there. You know, population's gone. You know, so tourism has serious impacts. It can change places utterly if it handles wrong. And if you look at the protests that people from Venice, people from Barcelona, you know, even people from Ibiza and so on, people from Lisbon, you know, these are really serious issues if you get it wrong. And so it's really important that tourism is something that everybody benefits from and doesn't turn your place into some kind of visitable museum. That would be the calamity. So there's quite a lot of communication, which is really important. Diane's going to touch on the Oxford Living Wage and what data we have on how that is currently being adopted and things like. But it's things like that. It's about seeing tourism not as something that happens to you and which you've got low-paid, 0-hour contract jobs, but something you can build a business around, a career around, whatever it might be. That's something that is meaningful for people, for local businesses, local communities. I think that, and that's a challenge. It's a challenge, but everywhere facing tourism in the world, that is a challenge, but you can get it right. But yes, certainly we and the providers will need to look at that. There was a couple of other things which I'm going to hand over. The unvisited parts of the city centre and things like that. I mean, I think it's difficult to identify exactly where you'd pick that up, but I was saying this to an architect I was talking to the other day. One thing Oxford is pretty much infamous for is we've got not one but two rather beautiful rivers that flow into our city. And for our full history, pretty much almost everywhere, we've turned our backs on them as if they're not there, which is astonishing, you know, given what we've done. There are a tiny number of places around Folly Bridge which actually observe the fact that the River Thames goes past them. Almost everywhere else, you know, we've either built a little wall or we've just built houses facing away from them. So I would say we've got a whole load of spaces which are close to our rivers, to our canals and things like that, which, you know, they're not going to occupy 1,000 people all arriving at once or something like that. But for people, you know, who are coming for a longer visit, they're potentially a very attractive morning walk, which ends up in a local cafe. And then you get your lunch there and then you go on to whatever it is you're visiting for. You know, there's a whole load of potentials like that. So things like parks, things like rivers. I think there's great swathes of East Oxford, which don't get nearly enough tourists. And there's plenty of interesting things in East Oxford. And anyone who's ever been to any city, anywhere in the world, the interesting things are sometimes getting away from where the tourism is and going to where the people are. And East Oxford will very much fall into that. So would Headington, so would Wolvercote. And I would also say, I mean, because the sort of thing I like doing if I'm going to visit a city, it can be really nice just hopping on a bus and then going to visit a village that's really close by. And then that's a completely different thing. And that's always fascinating. So there's all sorts of things which can be done, I think, to encourage, because what we want to move away from is that tourism, which is that 45-minute visit, point the camera, get back on the bus. Who's benefited from that? Well, the bus company, that's it, you know, and that's not great. I will shut up, but possibly come back to the Core Market Street question, because that's a really good one at the end.
Thank you, Alex. I'm just going to go through them in the order that they were raised. So one of the questions was the admin costs. That is covered by the Shared Prosperity Fund. So there's a contribution to my salary and other officers that are involved, and the consultant that will be used to deploy the task groups has been paid by Shared Prosperity Fund. So it's not coming from taxpayers' money. There was another question about how do we get the residents communicated to? So we're actually starting a programme of communication, and we've already got one set up. We've got our first press release going out tomorrow, and we'll be using existing locality officers within the council to reach out to them to get resident views, so they can then be presented back to the task groups. So the task groups have got that full level of information. There was concern about, will there be a loss of things, or is it all about tourists? My feeling is that if we can improve the city, it improves it for everybody. It doesn't just improve it for tourists. So everybody would benefit. And I feel really passionately that our city should be a city for all. And some of the things we've been doing recently with sort of some of the things that have been raised are sort of going into more about city centre management, which I'm very happy to come back and present on another time, but we'll loosely touch on. But we're looking at things like tourism hubs across the city so that residents can go in and they can find out the free things to do. They can find out where to get a free water refill. So once they're here, we want to make this a city for everybody to enjoy, not just for our tourists, but for our residents as well. I feel really passionate about that. It's really important to me. Another question was, are the hotels on the list the ones used for emergencies? Generally not, and they can be excluded. So the numbers that we've presented today are the indicative numbers based on the initial research, but that will be what the task groups can then decide to go down and decide that level of detail. There was a question around their cost implications. Will it put visitors off? From what we've analysed in Manchester and Liverpool, charges don't put people off. And I think, you know, the visitors that we have to Oxford are very used to paying everywhere now. Canaries, mainland Spain, mainland France, Italy, wherever you go, there is a tourism tax. And often if you're doing a package holiday, it won't even be in that price. It's not till you get to the hotel and then the hotel say, by the way, I recently went to Cape Verde and booked in at the hotel and they said, by the way, there's a tourism tax of 40 euros. No one blinks now. And we're talking about £2 a night, not £2 per person. Our average night stays are between £4 and £6. So we're looking at £8 to £12 on top of the bill. And you can exclude the very budget hotels. So the hotels that have got low number of rooms, a low rateable value, so that we're still not penalising those budget hotels. And that can be something that can be adjusted. You then went into a few city centre management things, are tourism related, but more about city centre management around beautifying the city. So obviously we've done a lot of work recently in St Michael's Street, we've done work in Market Street, and we have lots of working groups set up, as James knows, because he comes to the talk of the town. So every quarter we invite all of the businesses and organisations in the city to a networking event where we listen to what their issues are and we work with them. Separately to that, we've set up landlord meetings, which have never happened before. So we have a core market landlord meeting where we put pressure on the landlords to not rent out to candy shops, to not rent out to tourist shops. We don't want to end up like Windsor, where there's been no cap and it's just tourist shops everywhere. We need to have that balance. There has to be tourist shops, whether we like it or not, tourists expect it, but we have to cap that. And we have to have those residential shops as well and the student shops. So it's about catering for everybody. And again, it's something I feel really passionate about. You go to Stratford-upon-Avon and you will see tourist shop after vape shop after charity shop. It's not a good experience. Windsor is pretty much tourist shop. So we work really closely with our landlords, including the landlords in the colleges as well. We meet them every 6 months and we talk to them about our retail strategy. And we also talk to them about changing consumer habits so that we're ahead of the game and we're not following. We in Oxford want to be the leaders. And whilst it might look like we've got a lot of empty units, actually we don't. Most of them are under development. Every 6 months, we literally physically walk around, spot every unit, contact every letting agent. And if the unit is going to be empty for a while, we've actually started beautifying them. So you might have noticed down Turl Street, down the high street, we're working with local artists. We have pop-up immersive experiences. So when they contact us, we then put them in touch with the landlords. We work out the best space for them. We're working with the Botley Road traders at the moment about offering them a pop-up into Broad Street. But we're sort of branching into city centre management stuff. But I'm very happy to come back and talk about any of those issues because I appreciate they're really important. And If you hadn't already picked up, I'm really passionate about place, so very happy to come back and speak to you. And then with regard to the poorly paid sector, it's interesting, we do have an Oxford living wage. We actively promote it with the economic development team that manage that particular side. So I'm happy to get the facts and figures for you. We actively promote it to our businesses. We have a newsletter that goes out every month to over 640 recipients in the city alone. They've had a platform at our Talk of the Town meetings. And now that we're starting to have these task groups, we're talking to hoteliers in a way that we've never engaged with them before. So it gives us an opportunity and a forum to, it's not just about a task finish. Once we identify what projects are needed, that's the end of the communication. I see this as a relationship that's ongoing that will benefit the city, but also us to be able to share and encourage and support them. And I think that was all the questions in that round.
I had one. I said I'd save up something on Cool Market. On the living wage. I mean, I haven't looked at the stats recently, but of course, what we did have 21-22 was that most of the tourism sectors were having to pay considerably above the Oxford living wage because of the need to recruit staff to work in bars, restaurants, cafes, and indeed hotels, because demand was higher than supply. Be interesting to see whether that's still the strength, but I've not heard anything which suggests otherwise. On the Cool Market thing, I mean, picking up that point, what we've now got about that street, it's in transition, I think, and it's Clarendon Centre, and that is now an owner who it's changed ownership. So and it's we wait to see the planning application. It's not come through yet, so can't comment on that. I'm not couldn't anyway. But clearly that is covering at least a quarter of the entire street, pretty much. So that's big. And the point about the kind of tourism focused shop, there's sort of a variety from quite good tourism focused to not quite so good tourism focused, and the experience of engaging with the owners of those, most of whom, but not all of whom, are colleges, that the colleges are actually not keen to have those kinds of low quality tourism things. There's one particular landlord which seems to have got rather stuck in this, but I mean, it's an ongoing conversation, so we shall see what happens.
Thank you very much. Councillor Azad, I know you've had a question for a while, so I shall go to you.
Thank you. A lot of people are coming to the city in their personal vehicles, and a bad parking experience can actually ruin the whole day for the person or the people. As a city, how are we coping with the parking when the people come in summer, especially? It's a lot of visitors.
Thank you. I'm going to look and see if there are a couple more questions. We'll try not to have 10 for you this time. I apologise for that. But has anyone else got questions they wish to raise at this time? If not, I can bring in another one. Councillor Fry.
I know that I think this is more than anecdotal, if you ask tourists what they don't like about the city, it's the lack of public toilets. I mean, it's well known. We did have a scheme, and I have no idea whether it's just in abeyance or been positively abandoned, whereby we worked with those businesses, those stores that have their own toilets. I never know whether we contributed towards the cost. I gather that in a city like Bath, they apparently don't pay extra because the businesses feel that they actually benefit from the tourists coming to use the toilets, and they feel obliged often to spend some money there. But that is one of the biggest gaps. And given that we're not going to build more public toilets, I want to know whether we can reactivate that particular scheme, because again, that is apparently, especially for larger coach parties, one of the really big complaints they have about this city.
Thank you. I'm going to ask a piggybacking question on Councillor Fry's question, which links back to my original question. Obviously, we've sort of delimited the scope that if something is a required service, we couldn't use the money arising from the ABID for that. Would that preclude the businesses involved in the ABID electing to build facilities which they do not charge for if they were not council facilities, i.e. could the money be used for the provision of toilets as long as they're clearly not are toilets. Because I do agree with Councillor Fry that not just for tourists, in fact, for anyone in this city, there is a real issue with the lack of availability of public amenities. I know Councillor Miles had a couple of questions. Do you want to go to a round of answers, or are you ready to put a couple in?
It was just, and I'm sorry that I had to be late just due to childcare this evening, but my question is around the demographics of the existing visitors and what nationalities and sort of language groups that are represented, so whether or not we're meeting their needs, and also in terms of the age profile as well, and whether or not there's specific age bands that are underrepresented that we could be better targeting and increasing sort of the tourist offering for those age groups. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we'll go to a round of answers with that.
The order received, so I'll start with traffic and then hand over. I was just double checking the numbers. So these are Oxfordshire numbers, but 28 million visits. So even if you had 4 people in a car, that would be an awful lot of cars. I think even some of the more rural bits of Oxfordshire would struggle with that many cars turning up. I think the very substantial majority of tourists, not all of them, but the very substantial majority come by some form of public transport, a train, a bus, on a coach. But there are plenty that do come either in their own car or actually, as anyone who goes on to Cornmarket and sees somebody coming down Market Street and looking baffled that the phone has told them they're supposed to drive down there to get to Carfax or wherever it is they're trying to go. Honestly, it's Market Street every single day. An expensive 4-wheel drive hired at Heathrow Airport will appear with a slightly confused and worried tourist in it. And you have to sort of like, where are you trying to get to? Oh, no, you can't get to Christchurch College and park inside it. That's not how it works. Probably best if you park the car and walk. Anyway, so yeah, there are elements about parking, but I mean, what we're talking about is a very, very substantial number of visitors. And so were we to encourage more of them to come by car rather than fewer of them, I think that would be highly problematic, because one of the things that is quite clear, it is not possible to increase the capacity of Oxford or Oxfordshire to cars as its population has grown. You know, we can veer off into Christchurch Meadows, and 1956 there was a proposal to build a road across Christchurch Meadow, and that definitely did not happen, and it will never happen. So it is very, very hard to see how you could provide more space for car parking. So what I think it points to is that we need to make sure that when people do visit, there are good alternative things to them. It could be making the park and ride really friendly, and everyone can look at the park and ride facilities and go, Thornhill looks quite good. Everything else begins to get slightly less. Red Bridge is all right, but they could be better. They could be further away, and we could bring people in from further afield. So somebody who parks, say, near Bicester and is able to spend some of their day in Oxford looking at historic buildings and nice parks and things like that, and some of it in Bicester Village, which is providing, a really exciting retail opportunity. Whatever it is that they're here for, they could have public transport to both of those, which would work really nicely. So I think it is something that we need to be aware of and make sure we're facilitating the best alternatives that we possibly can to everyone who comes here. And I'm going to leave toilets to you, and demographics and age profile. I think the one thing I would say, and you've got far more detail than me, what has been absolutely fascinating is that China's lifted its restriction on its citizens to travel. So we've known since COVID, the sudden disappearance of huge numbers of visitors who come from China to Oxford, and that has changed. Began to change last year, definitely changed this year, and it's really nice to see loads of visitors from, actually it's no longer the most populous country in the world, the second most populous country in the world now, coming, because, that's a really important connection to make in terms of city and people and place and all sorts of other things. There's plenty of people from this country going as tourists to China. It's nice to see that reversed.
Thank you, Alex. Can I just say thank you for such a wide range of questions as well. It's lovely to hear so much interest, and we really value that. So thank you very much. We've cleared off parking, so yeah, public toilets, the bane of my life. I was gonna look at behind my shoulder, but I won't do that. So James is referring to the community toilet scheme, and we've done a lot of investigation. So one of the projects in the City Centre Action Plan was to review the community toilet scheme. It sounds like one of those things a bit like sponsorship. Oh, it's going to sort everything out because the businesses will willingly open up their toilets. It doesn't work like that. So in Oxford, it pretty much failed. And when we've done research with about 30 other places, the only time it works is if there is a funded officer managing the process, and that's having SLAs with businesses and paying the businesses for cleaning products, for toilet roll. Businesses do not want people in their premises that are not spending money. It costs them money, and there's a lot of damage done, unfortunately. There's ridiculous amounts of antisocial behaviour that goes on in toilets, which we won't go into. So community toilet schemes, it will only work if there's a dedicated officer that is employed to do it. And from the case studies we've seen, that when the officer that's employed to do it actually stops, the community toilet scheme fails. And it's hugely time intensive. But it sounds like a really good option, and it was something we were really keen to prove as a model that worked, but we just can't prove that it could work for us. Absolutely agree. Toilets are a major issue within the city, as they are actually in every historic city in Europe. As we've got more of an ageing population, it's becoming more of an issue, as are benches with arms, you know, the use of toilets and for young children. It is problematic. So what we've been doing is reviewing all of the public toilet provision across the city and making sure it's promoted. So if you go into Google Maps now, you can actually put toilets in Oxford. Google Maps is amazing. It's more than just directions. You can actually get really detailed information. And so what we've done is we've made sure that all of the public toilets in the city are listed on there. We've been looking at Market Street, where there's high demand, and trying to work out what we can and can't do. It's really difficult because even if we open up the traders' toilets in Market Street, for example, they use the same pipes, which, excuse me, sounds horrible, but they physically get blocked up. So just by opening up more toilets, we've got an antiquated system to deal with it. And when you've got a historic place, it's actually really difficult to create more toilets. But what we are doing is working with those places that do public toilet provision, and we work really closely with our planners now. So I meet the planning team every month to understand what developers are doing with long-term empty units and to make sure we're getting the right. So Clarendon Quarter being one of them, really exciting development. I'm really excited to see what comes through there. From what you're hearing from the investors, great stuff. But it gives us an opportunity to talk to these investors right up front and say, please make sure you have public toilets in the Clarendon Quarter. At the train station development, please make sure that your toilets continue to be accessible for people that aren't just ticket payers. So it's about creating that pressure on our developers and working with them, which is why it's really important to build those relationships up in the city so they can see the value. And it comes back to public and private sector working together in a much more joined up way to take responsibility for our city. So it's not an easy answer, I'm afraid. And if you have one, please share it with me, because I haven't found the easy answer yet. But we are constantly looking at case studies across Europe. Yeah, I was just going to go on to, if the businesses decide that they would like to fund toilets of a certain thing, there's some really interesting examples of what Japan are doing. Not for me, I'm afraid. And what like pop-up pods that are see-through until you go in them, and then apparently they glaze over. And I'm thinking, well, what if it doesn't glaze over? So some really interesting examples about what's happening internationally that the hoteliers could absolutely look at funding if they chose that was a project that they would like to fund. They can do additionality. Yeah, absolutely. And finally, we had the demographics. You've asked for some quite detailed demographics there, some of which are actually very difficult to. It's almost impossible for us to get ages. As technology becomes more sophisticated, we are currently looking at modules to enhance on our footfall, which will actually tell us where mobiles are registered. At the moment, we can't see all we know is if they're registered outside of the UK, but we don't know where. So a lot of the evidence about demographic is anecdotal. But what we are doing is we have set up some tourism, well, not set them up. We have started to brand places that already offer tourist information in a light-hearted way, like the Bodleian Library, like the train station, like the bus station areas, Christchurch. the Story Museum, Oxford Castle. Suddenly, if you look at the fact that the tourists go in there asking for information, we've now asked them to be branded as a tourism hub. And although the initial work was for us just to do branding, we're actually getting some really interesting data. So for example, we found out what the 3 top languages spoken in the city. And we know that the top language that's coming in from our tourists and our local residents is Portuguese. So maybe we can start working with some of our restaurants and get them to have menus in other languages so that we look like we're more of an inclusive city rather than, it feels slightly arrogant at the moment. You come into Oxford and everything's in English. Does that really send out a message to our residents and to our tourists?
Yeah. Just a couple of, I mean, it's fascinating. You go to Bicester Village and the rail announcements are in English and Chinese and Japanese, and that shows a lot of respect to where their visitors are coming from. The other thing, this is going to show my age and also my lack of technical skills, but using phones and the access to that data can be fascinating. Those of you of a certain age, many of you are too young to remember this, but maybe a couple of us are sufficiently aged. But when Apple brought out one of its new phones, there was research of where those phones were found in, I think it was Toronto, it's one of the big Canadian cities. And almost immediately they realized these are the cool clubs. These are the clubs where people are going because these are the people who buy this. And it was like the most fantastic way of identifying. So people were literally going, where should we go out tonight? I'll tell you what, we'll look on that little map and it'll tell us that's cool because that's where the Apple guys are going. That's cool. And it was a fantastic way. So there's all sorts of interesting ways that you never think of. Well, I certainly didn't when I saw that, you know, thinking of using data to tell us where people are going and indeed where they're not going and where we might need to encourage them to go, you know, that kind of thing.
Thank you very much. Where we've put you through your paces quite a lot, it's getting very warm in here. So I'm going to take one more round of questions and then we'll call it for questions if that's okay with everyone. So I've got Catherine wanting a question. Has anyone else got other questions to ask? Okay, we've got Catherine and then one from me and then we'll call that an end.
So today, if you go down by the river, there are quite a lot of people on paddleboards and water sports. To what extent could we explore sort of improving the tourism offering from the river? We know punts are popular and the like little canoes that you can hire, but I wonder whether there's more that can be done there. Is that something that could be looked into? And even when it comes to like Hinksey, the lake there, if you go to other cities around Europe, they would make much more about the water features and things that could be done. So there's that. The other thing is I just want to mention and it's a bit of a flag around policy coherence. I know that there's a piece of work being done around the town hall. It came to scrutiny around future purposes for the town hall and how it can be potentially renovated. I'm probably using the wrong words, but I know that there's the basement here. We've got the tunnels that need exploring. I know I've talked to others about the potential for the tunnels to be opened and used as a sort of tourist offering, but it costs money to do that, money that we don't have. But could the bid support maybe exploring that as a tourist offering? Thank you.
And then just from me as a couple, one is firstly around the locality of this. So obviously we've talked a lot about city centre. On the modelling, what was the sort of geographic boundary of that? Does that cover the entire city region? My guess is not. So could we just have some sort of guidance on where it starts and ends? And also, obviously, I'm completely aware that this is a decision for the levy payers. Is there any scope on these task groups for there to be, say, for example, councillor involvement or any sort of democratic involvement? The answer to that may well be no, but it would just, again, be useful to have, you know, what the scopes and limits are.
On rivers, I've already said my rivers answer, so I will do a very short version, which is we have a long history as a city of not being nearly as visible enough or proud enough of our rivers, and we can and should do more. The Oxwed development is an opportunity to finally put that right, or begin to, but yes, rivers, absolutely. I'll let you pick up the other. Sorry, what was your second question, Catherine? I should have. Tunnels, that was it. I knew I was going to answer something else. Yeah, no, I know. So in answer to half of that, the town hall has got layers, tons and tons and tons of potential asset And every time you get enthusiastic about it, somebody wisely says that will be another several £billion it'll cost to open that up. The costs will be very, very substantial. What an ABID, I am absolutely sure, would not do is to provide a very, very large sum of money to another landowner to do up their potential tourism attraction. I just can't see why you would do that. So I think it's highly unlikely. I also think the amounts are probably not sufficient, bluntly. So that's a different challenge which the council will have to address. Another day at Scrutiny, perhaps we could have a look at great length at that. I will leave you to pick up the other bits.
Yes, thank you, Alex. And just picking up on the waterways, I absolutely agree with you. You know, our blue offer in the city is stunning, as is our green offer, and they often get forgotten about. And through the tourism hubs, we'd really like to use those hubs to encourage people to visit other parts of the city and not just go to the most historic. And we're looking at online wayfinding at the moment. We're looking at an app, and it would be lovely. I'd love to have a tab on there saying, do you want a free day out in the city? And we talk about the water, and we talk about the green areas and the colleges you can go into for free. So we're very much on your, and I think it can come down to, you know, if you talk about it enough and it attracts people. I'd love to see down by Christchurch like a floating cafe where you could walk down and get a coffee, you know. So it's about spotting those opportunities and making those things happen, which we're really keen on doing. And in terms of the ABID specifically, if there was a desire by the levy payers that they wanted to fund something around the water, they can certainly create a subvention fund, which we've seen in Manchester and Liverpool, where they set aside a pot of money to put towards people that want to do things and want to make things happen. So that's within their gift to ring fence some money to do that. But it's very much down to the levy payers to vote on that project and to agree that that is something that's important to them. But I think a review of our events within the city would be really helpful as part of this process as well. There was a question around governance and the task groups. The task groups have to be predominantly levy payers, and we run a real risk of, if we have it too council dominated, we'll just disengage with them and they'll go, actually, this is beginning to feel like a council project, and it's not. So we will be guided by our consultants, but we suspect that on both task groups that we will need someone senior to sit on a task group representing the council, but we haven't quite decided at what level that is. And then there'll be an overarching board that will pull together both of that. And I imagine that'll be someone fairly senior, but it's likely there'll only be one. We will need an officer and a councillor, senior councillor, or maybe just a councillor in some of the task groups reporting into an officer offline. But we have to be really careful about getting that balance right, and that the levy payers feel this is their group.
Brilliant, thank you. There was also the question about the locations. Just on your modelling, which locations were included or excluded?
Yeah, apologies. It's all the hotels within our authority that pay us business rates. But that, again, that boundary can be determined by the levy payers. So if they decide that they don't want hotels beyond a certain boundary, they can do that. They can set their own boundary. For feasibility purposes, our initial was just to understand how many hotels would fall within that remit. Because quite honestly, the hotels that are right next to a park and ride, let's be honest, the reason that they're predominantly busy is because people are coming into the city and they want a positive experience when they come in.
That's great. Thank you very much. Thank you so much for all of your answers, both of you. I know we've put a lot of questions to you, but it's been really interesting to hear about this, and I think it sounds really, really promising if it's something that can be pushed through. So obviously we now move to recommendations, but noting that this is something where we are not the decision maker, we might have to be quite circumspect in what we can do in terms of recommendations. Were there any recommendations colleagues wished to propose? Yeah, Councillor Mundy.
So I thought the point that you were making about public toilets, it came up as well, that anecdotally at least it's something that everybody really, and the tourists and residents included, are noticing as a high impacting issue if they're not being the availability. So perhaps we could recommend that we're doing more to promote. I know you've said that on Google Maps the public toilets are there, but I just wonder whether, dare I say it, but the toilets in the town hall, for example, and other public buildings that we have, when we finished the community centre down Cowley Road, that always used to have public toilets that when the building was open, people could just go in and use them. So are we ensuring that, the residents and visitors really are aware of all the facilities that are available. And just, recommendation just being that we are ensuring that we're maximising the awareness that people have of the facilities that they do have available to them.
Perhaps if we formulate that in the format of can we, to the extent the council can influence things, encourage the organisations involved in the ABID to promote public toilets to the extent that they can? Would you think something like that might be plausible? I'm happy to take an officer response.
Could I comment? I think the point about the toilets, definitely put that in. I would be ever so slightly nervous of adding the word ABID and the connection there, because it would sound like the council trying to instruct it. So if you wouldn't mind leaving that off and allowing it to be understood instead, that would be helpful.
I think that sounds eminently sensible, noting the restrictions we've heard previously. Celeste, is that a clear enough recommendation for us? Is everyone happy to agree to that recommendation? Brilliant. Were there any other recommendations colleagues wish to propose? I have one other, but again, the extent to which it's possible, I am putting out there as a suggestion, and I am open to officer feedback on it. So I guess the suggestion here will be, when we're thinking about the task groups, can we please have a recommendation that sort of to the effect says we should have the most elected democratic say possible, consistent with the restrictions of the scheme, i.e., you mentioned a senior councillor being present. That would probably be, at least in my view, preferable potentially to it being an officer, even though the officer might have the expertise, because there's that democratic accountability. It's not necessarily to change the format, but just to ensure that to the extent the council is a facilitator, there is some democratic accountability in the system. If anyone would be minded to second that recommendation. Councillor Jarvis, I see a second. Is everyone happy to approve that as a recommendation? Brilliant. Thank you very much for your time today. Really, really interesting to hear about this, and I appreciate we put you for a lot of questions. So,
really good questions, and thank you very much. Really interesting.
Can I just echo that as well? And thank you for the opportunity to come to present to you tonight and coming out on such a steaming hot night. And if there's been quite a lot of sort of city centre management things being raised. So if at any point any of you just want to grab a coffee with me and I can talk to you about, because we've got a whole raft of other projects that we're dealing with, this is just one of them, but very happy to share the work and happy to be probed on it and pushed on it, because we don't always get it right. So it's really, this sort of process for us is really good to make sure that we're on the right track. So thank you for your time.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. I'm going to recommend we have a 5-minute break just to adjourn before the next item, so colleagues have a chance to get water, perhaps cool down a minute. So if we can come back at, let's call it 7:45 actually, and give everyone 8 minutes. To Helen and Vicky to introduce the report, please.
Yeah, thank you very much for having us. Just to say, I'm sure you're aware that the original strategy was approved back in 2023. This is a refresh. We're aiming to do a major overhaul in 2027. Obviously, what we've done is we've refreshed and had a look at the city's demographic profile. And I'm sure you don't need me to tell you that that's showing increasing diversity, profound health inequalities, and some parts of the city experiencing extreme poverty and a digital divide to boot. We have tried to take that information and reflect that in the revised recommendations. We've done a fair, I mean, you guys need to be the judge of that, but I feel that we've done a fair amount in the last couple of years, but there is more to be done. The services that the City Council provide make a real difference to the quality of life of our citizens and communities. But I feel like the customer experience elevates it from just being a transaction, a one-on-one experience, to really thinking about how is this affecting the person that's in front of me? How can we make the service more inclusive? How can we enable people that perhaps want to do their own thing, do that and be able to be self-sufficient, but by the same token, make sure that no one gets left behind. And that has been some of the feedback that we've had when I'm sure you've seen in the papers that we have done an internal trawl through our different policy groups, but we've also spoken to community champions and the tenants ambassadors. And that's some of the feedback that they've been saying to us. You know, you need to make sure that where we need to be using more of our community spaces, making sure that where we can, we're more visible in the community, not just in the Westgate, but making sure it's appropriate to the target audience. And I think the other thing is making sure that we're working with the communities. So it's not just a simple transactional response. We're really thinking about the life situation where it's appropriate for that person and able to either resolve the situation ourselves or know who appropriately might help them, whether it's a member of the voluntary community sector or another agency. So I guess I don't want to waffle on and prejudge what your questions are, but I guess that's what we've tried to take on board when we've done this refresh. You'll have seen in the revised strategy that we've got a number of actions that we've updated as well. So myself, Vicky's here as well on the screen. So happy to take your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just to check, Vicky, you didn't have anything you wanted to add before questions?
No, I don't think so, but thank you.
Thank you very much. So colleagues, we move to questions. Has anybody got any questions they'd like to open us up with? Yeah, Councillor Ortino.
Can you give some examples of how you are reaching people that might not necessarily respond to us? You mentioned going to sort of community centres, but there are some parts of the city there aren't really any community buildings. So how do you reach those people? And I would say that quite a lot of the feedback I might get from many of my constituents about any sort of consultation is, what's the point? Nobody listens. It's already predetermined decision. How do you get it across that hopefully isn't the case? And that might be influenced by if you live in a block and the bin store's a mess, or there's antisocial behaviour going on in the property next to you, that's the priority. And if the council's not fixing that, how can you get somebody to believe that actually their view on some other matter is relevant? I mean, I suppose I'm also interested in young people. You talked about, I think, about getting some young youth group, youth committee together. What are you doing? Are you going into schools, for instance, and trying to engage with young people, possibly even before they're at sort of voting age? Because I mean, that is a worry that if young people start feeling there's no point in being involved in the democratic process or having no faith in local authorities doing anything, What are you doing about that to overcome those barriers?
Thank you very much, Councillor Ottino. Councillor Jarvis, you had a question?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report. I had a question around AI, which is mentioned at various points in the strategy document. I just wondered how is the council currently utilising AI with regards to services? And clearly within this document there appears to be a move towards greater utilisation of AI. And I guess the question really is how are we ensuring that that doesn't provide a diminished service to residents and diminish their experience? Because AI is, like all things, variable in its quality, and that's a really important thing to get right.
Could I pick up a direct follow-up on that? Because I had an AI question, which is currently at, in terms of the environmental impact assessment, it states that the increased use of web technology and the decreased use for travel and paperwork will reduce environmental impact. But obviously we know that AI is incredibly carbon intensive as well as water intensive. So I guess what consideration has gone into the environmental implications of increased AI usage as is proposed by some of the sort of policy guidance or policy proposals you've had from some of your consultations? Obviously that might be something for going into the 27 refresh, but just what consideration has been made of the environmental impact of increased AI? Councillor Miles, I'll come to you after, I think, a round of answers, if that's okay.
Right, thank you for that. Come back to the original question around examples of how we're reaching people in the community and what are we doing. So we have a contact centre, obviously, that's telephony only. But we do have a face-to-face service which operates from the Westgate, and we are, I'm sure you appreciate, we operate side by side with Citizens Advice Oxford. So to start off with, that has had enormous benefits in terms of people that are going in specifically with citizens' advice questions. They're referring to us and we're doing the same. So that's had a benefit. But then that does just rely on people going to the Westgate. So one of the things that we have done is we have utilised the food larders across the city, appreciating that there is, unfortunately, a huge cost of living crisis, and recognising that some of our most vulnerable citizens are subscribing to those food larders. So we have we've got a rota basically where we're going around to each of those, taking the customer service roadshow, for want of a better description there, making sure that we're providing access to services at that point. Having said that, one of the things that we've noticed, we've been doing that for about 12 months, because it's a finite audience, we're kind of satiated that market as well. So we are now looking for that's one of the things that we're doing at the moment, is reviewing. Perhaps we could go, if we're going to each larder once every 6 weeks, perhaps we should do that once every 10, and include other community settings. So that's one of the things. If you've got some idea, obviously we've got thoughts about where we want to go, but if anything that springs to your mind, all contributions gratefully received. I think the other thing to say is that we've sort of tangential to that, we've been working with the County Council and the Bob ICB, and in terms of trying to reach people with maybe some digital challenges. We've got the digital cafe that's been set up in the Westgate Library, trying to help people with skills. And we've just finished I think it was about an 8-week course that was in the Lees, where we work with Activate Learning, again, trying to encourage people to broaden their technological skills. So just trying to think a bit around not just having a physical presence, but trying to help people to be a bit more self-sufficient as well. So I don't know, with all of these, I'm looking at Vicky on the screen, if there's anything I've missed, if she wants to add on. Shall I keep going and then as I work through the questions?
Yes, please. Yeah, feel free to continue, and Vicky can jump in whenever.
And okay, that's great. The other question was around how do we know that we are, or how do our community citizens know that we're listening and that we're taking comments on board and that we're actually responding. That is some of the feedback that we've had when we've gone out, to be honest, is, there is, I don't know if you experience this when you meet with your constituents. Sometimes people, they feel that they're giving us lots of information, but the "you said, we did" is sometimes missing. And that's one of the things that we do want to make sure that we're picking up in our comms, so that as we're getting feedback from members of the community and individuals, that we're responding. The other thing to say, though, is that we have we've introduced across the council a new comments and complaints process. So across the general inquiries and also in housing as well, those inquiries are coming in. They can come in face to face, web enabled, over the telephone, and we're making sure that we're monitoring those. One of the things that we want to get more into is, as you'll see in the action plan, is actually establishing the trends, etc., that are coming from those. So that's in terms of direct feedback. I know one of the things we want to do in the localities as well is reintroduce walkabouts with other members of the community in those localities, so that we make sure that we're using that as an opportunity to almost circumvent people calling up, and making sure that we're getting to those spots more easily. In terms of young people, there is a young person's panel that has been set up by colleagues in the consultation team. One of the things that we do it's not specifically covered by this strategy, but we're working side by side with the localities team, and they do work with the schools in their areas. Really keen to do that. And as an organisation, of course, we're about to launch our new cohort of apprentices and encourage work experience as well. But always more to be done. So I guess, again, if you've got any ideas, or you've got some things that you think that we could work with, that would be brilliant. AI. So we have, in the last 12 months, we've got a couple of cohorts of apprentices across the organisation, one for data intelligence and one for AI. So we've got a cohort of staff and another cohort about to go in the next couple of months, where we're trying to tool up willing volunteers across the business who are probably working with that in their day-to-day roles. So we're trying to improve our knowledge, I guess. One of the things that that cohort is also doing is we've bought some additional MS Copilot licenses. With MS Teams, you get the free version. We've bought some paid for licenses as well. And one of the things that they're working on as part of their apprenticeship is to establish how we could actually utilise those paid for licenses. Does it offer any more benefits than the free version, which we've also got? So there's I guess a work in progress where we're trying to improve the AI skill set across the organisation, and trying to understand how we could capitalise on that as an organisation. In terms of the customer service, we've commissioned a piece of work yet to be started to work in the contact centre, where we want them to do some data capture analysis, looking at people's intent when they ring, so that we can understand how we might better use AI, route callers, etc., so that we can use technology and get them an answer quicker, and maybe save somebody that call into the contact centre. More to be done on AI. We're just about to draft. We've got a policy. I think one of your other questions was around how do we make sure that we're not diminishing the response. I think one of the things we're very clear about is you can't just leave AI without human intervention and some review, and we need to be very mindful of that. But we've got a draft AI strategy, which we're actually tomorrow at the working group we're going to be giving a bit of an overhaul to. So I don't know if I've answered all the questions. Probably not.
I think that was all. The only one that was outstanding was the environmental impact of AI.
Sorry.
Please don't worry.
Yeah, so we've got, as you'll have seen from the risk assessment, we've got a very generic equalities impact assessment, which we've included in the strategy. And our approach has been for every project that we've got, that we'll do a more detailed EIA, which we've stuck to for the projects so far. I mean, and I think aside from that, we're early doors on how we're utilising that within the strategy. So I think that could be something that we ought to make sure, I mean, don't want to preempt, but that might be a great recommendation for you to make. But that's I can't remember seeing that actually in our draft strategy that we've got at the moment. Vicky might want to add on to that.
I think, I think there would be a nod that obviously that strategy would be supported by obviously a data protection impact assessment as well as an equality impact assessment. So yeah, that's what I was going to say as well.
Thank you very much. And just to pick up that, when referring, so obviously there is inequalities impact to AI use, but I was also referring to the environmental impact of AI use, because obviously the amount of carbon released by a single search on AI is massively in excess of that used by, say, people traveling, including by car, or indeed by people printing things out. And I do think at the moment that there's a bit of a disconnect between the statement that the move towards web technology is going to reduce the environmental impact, while at the same time we are sort of, from the working group recommendations, seemingly pushing quite heavily on how do we maximize AI usage when there is quite well documented serious environmental impacts associated with that. I'll go around for another round of questions, but if you had any response on that when we get the other questions, that will be very helpful. But thank you very much. Councillor Miles?
Thank you very much. So just on the demographic piece, we've talked about different profiles, but certainly what I see in my ward is around the age profile and some of the chronic conditions. So, you know, you talk about Parkinson's, dementia, and so it's not always about the economic status, but it's about mental or mobility and capacity related to that. So to what extent are you going to be engaging with either the carers or who maybe live in quite often, or relatives of frail residents who are for physical or mental capacity reasons due to the chronic conditions unable to be engaging? And one thing that, you know, always strikes me, for instance, is if there are phone services, quite often these things run through very quickly. And if you're very, very slow to be able to press the right button, you have to wait 20 minutes, you know, to go through everything, to re-listen. And certainly, you know, if you have one of these conditions, it can be very challenging. On the demographics also, do you consider engagement with the boat dwellers? I understand from an age profile, some recent work that's been done separately by the council has profiled many people who are living on canal boats actually in our city are much older than we might have anticipated. So are you using a particular channel to engage with them? On the young people, there's often a lot of talk about young people, and then we talk about adolescents, but what about the under 12? Because they certainly have a lot of views around litter, for instance, or other kind of issues that the council is providing. So how can we engage with them? And have you considered replicating something like the Pizza and Politics that the county council do successfully in pulling in children of different age groups? And just, you did ask a question whether we knew of places where you could replicate these approaches of engaging more locally. And just to alert you to the Waterways Community Room, which is little known about, but the poverty pockets in North Oxford that we mustn't forget about, and that's very close by. And also the library in Summertown is a very accessible place for some people to be able to get to, so please do consider that. Thank you.
Brilliant.
Thank you very much. Any other colleagues wishing to raise questions? Seeing none, I had one other question, which is basically about contingency planning. So obviously, I completely understand the increased utilisation of digital contact points as a way to improve the citizen experience, but obviously, quite presciently, having been so affected in the last meeting of this committee, there are periods where web services may have, for various reasons, limited accessibility. So I guess it would be useful to hear what contingency planning is going on for maybe periods where there are web outages, which could, if we lean too far towards web usage, obviously have quite dramatic effects on the citizen experience, at least within quite a contextual time period, if that makes sense.
Yep. Do you want me to?
Yes, please.
So to pick up your EIA point first, I think that's something that we ought to pick up. I can't give you a definitive answer now, but I do think it's something we ought to pick up in our AI strategy and perhaps consider as part of when we do the formal, the major refresh for 2027. Some of the points that Councillor Miles raised, in just the order I've written them down. So the age profile, absolutely. So some of the work that a lot of the work that we're doing with our localities teams, we have actually just done a refresh of the demographic profiles of our 4 major localities. And you won't be surprised to learn that they are all slightly different, although they've probably got the similar themes. And what we're doing is we're going to be, we've already got action plans that we're using, but we're going to be coming out to those ward councillors and asking, does this feel right for your areas? And who else, you know, we quite clearly already engage with community groups, but I think that would be a perfect opportunity to make sure that we're focusing on the right things. And are there groups that we don't know of, for example, that we could be working with? So I think that's, you know, we are aware of that, and that's, you know, quite happy to, if you want in your particular area, we can sit and explain what we're doing. You talked about the press button response. Yeah, absolutely. Just to reassure you that if somebody was to be on the on that interactive voice platform and they didn't press anything, they wouldn't get lost. So if they do nothing, somebody picks them up. So I hope that reassures you. And there is also, I think the first number that you can press on that is for the vulnerable resident line. So if somebody, and we've done that on purpose, so hopefully that is a bit of a fail-safe. Boat dwellers, brilliant point, and I think that's maybe something we need to take away and have a think about what we're doing to maybe engage with them and make sure that our services are appropriate. Likewise, the under 12s engagement, brilliant idea, pizza and politics. We have actually got a consultation strategy that another member of my team, and I think that's maybe something we could pick up under that and think about how are we engaging that younger demographic. So I think that's really relevant. And thank you for the tip about the library. We're always looking for that could be somewhere that we could, again, extend our services to. In terms of contingency planning, so of course we do have the Westgate Library and some of the other spaces, and indeed over the last couple of weeks, had we needed to, I think that we would have been going into those community spaces. I know we are all going to be dusting down our business continuity plans in the next couple of weeks as we do a bit of a lessons learned, but I mean that would immediately be where we would have gone to. Of course, you know, it's reliant on having, some of it's reliant on the technology, although of course we would ultimately, our business continuity would be, we would revert to pad and pen, the good old traditional methods. So yeah, point well made.
Thank you very much. Were there any other questions colleagues wish to raise? In that case, I think we can move to recommendations. Thank you very much for the detailed answers. It's really, really helpful to get.
Yeah, that's okay. It's really, I mean, you know, just to echo what Di said, it's brilliant to have the feedback because we're sitting, when we're doing as, you know, consultation, but it's great to have the feedback. So thank you.
Thank you. So colleagues, recommendations. Councillor Ottino?
Something along the lines of, if we are carrying out any sort of consultation or attempt to get feedback, can we have at least a small sample, an element of that, where we actually physically go out and go up to our residents in distant parts of the city, nowhere near the Westgate Centre, to get their views, whether that be literally knocking on people's doors. You can pick up a huge amount of tenancy issues just by knocking people's doors, or hanging outside the school or the park, or being at Cali Centre, for instance, going out to shoppers. For the people, you know, those people often aren't going to get to the city centre, and they often aren't going to respond to sort of online things, whether. So yeah, obviously that's quite time intensive, but I think you can pick up quite a good sample of the people that wouldn't necessarily take part in consultations to get their feedback. And you can also pick up lots of individual things that are actually quite easy to solve. if an officer just passes it on to the right person.
Thank you. So I'm hearing their recommendation basically for consultation to include physical presence in areas further outside the city centre. Any second for the, yeah, Councillor Miles? Brilliant. Is everyone agreed with that as a recommendation? Excellent. Do you have enough clarity on that one, Celeste? Yeah.
That there is some, I wonder if that could incorporate some reference to, it's not just about the location, but it's also the channels of communication when you're there. So thinking about elderly residents that maybe don't speak English, have you got someone with you that might be able to, if you're going to a specific group and you, want to be asking someone from a particular background who doesn't speak good English, whether you could have someone there that might be able to support that engagement. Because there are many people who've lived here for most of their life but might not speak good English. So if there's that could be incorporated in the reference.
Brilliant, thank you. I think we certainly can incorporate that. So something like to undertake in-person consultation in areas outside of the city centre with the support of interpreters where appropriate. We'd word it like that, if everyone happy with that as a recommendation. Excellent. Councillor Giles, I think you had a hand before.
Thank you. Yeah, it's possibly a recommendation, but it's actually mostly a question for you, Chair, whether you think this would be appropriate. But I think given the huge opportunities, but also the massive risks that AI poses with regards to this particular area of work, I wondered whether you would be minded to request for the AI strategy specifically to come to scrutiny in the future.
I think that sounds like a very sensible idea, and I've probably been quite clear that it's an area that concerns me in the things that I've raised. I think it might be something to put through on the work plan element rather than being a recommendation here. So maybe we could pick that up under the agenda item for work plan. But I do think there's a recommendation about this as well on the AI point, which is we've noted 2027. I would possibly recommend a recommendation that the use of AI is considered in terms of both environmental and equality impact as a core part of the work going into the 2027 citizen engagement strategy. And we would ideally see a specific section addressing the implications of AI on both those areas. I do think particularly the section 40 carbon and environmental considerations do really need to be looked at in terms of AI use. The evidence coming out about the impact of AI is really quite concerning. Is there anyone happy to second that as a recommendation? I see most people, so we can say that as seconded. So we'll put that as our second recommendation. Were there any others people wish to recommend? Councillor Miles?
Yeah, it's if we're going to be an age-friendly city, if we could put a recommendation around ensuring that we're consulting with children proactively, including the under 12s. I recognise that maybe the under 5s is a bit more tricky, but I think children in the upper primary school, the beginning of secondary, have quite strong opinions on things. So yeah, and their customers. Thank you.
Yeah, I would be happy to second that. I was narratively, I went along to one of the county's pizza and politics sessions, and it was really good. So if we could look at something like that, I think that would be very welcome. Is everyone happy with that as a third recommendation? Excellent. Was there anything else, or are we satisfied on this item? Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for coming and for your answers. And thank you, Vicky, as well. So we are now going to move to considering the minutes of the previous meeting. I'm going to presume colleagues have had a chance to look at these in advance. Were there any corrections colleagues wished to raise? I had one very minor correction, or amendment, I should say, which is on page 14 with the introduction of the Circa report. It notes that I reminded the committee it would not be appropriate for members to raise wider concerns relating to the Circa group. I just would like to amend it to note that I said, though those concerns were very legitimate, so that that is recorded for the purposes of the minutes. Is everyone happy to agree the minutes subject to that amendment? Thank you very much. Having agreed the minutes, we now move to consider our work plan. This is agenda item 8. So in terms of the work plan, we do have one change regarding the August meeting, which is to say that Cabinet in August is now going to be considering the Oxpens Bridge. And I would suggest that we might want to call that in, and I would be minded to do so. Would everyone be in agreement with that coming to scrutiny? Thank you very much. I will see that as agreed. Councillor Ottino, yes.
What way are they considering it? Because you can explain what the cabinet is it a planning? It's not a planning application. What exactly are they doing?
The cabinet forward plan came out this afternoon, so I'm going to defer to Celeste to give the specific information.
Yeah, no worries, Chair, thank you. Yeah, so essentially, Councillor, it's an approval for Cabinet to delegate the authority to one of the directors to enter into legal and funding agreements. That will be what they would be speaking about in this report. Is there any particular question that you would?
So they are delegating powers.
Yeah, so the report is essentially sort of an operational, if may, form of report that will be coming to Cabinet. But yeah, if the committee is minded to call this in due to the matter at hand, yeah, then they may wish to. It can call it in for the August meeting.
So what exactly are we scrutinising?
So, Chair, how would that work? And because presumably there wouldn't be a report to scrutinise, but a decision to organise, is that what you're suggesting?
We would be able to consider or to scrutinise the delegations that are taking place, the decision the Cabinet will be making, and put forward recommendations about that decision. Obviously, the benefit there, just to respond to you, Councillor Ottino specifically, is that this has been a matter of great interest to many members of the council and also many members of the public, and it would therefore seem appropriate for the scrutiny committee to consider it in light of the significant public interest, if nothing else.
I mean, I recognise that, but you're just saying the decision is to delegate powers to an officer to do X, Y, or Z. An officer is at some point is going to have to go and do X, Y, and Z. It's clearly not practical for that to be done by a committee or probably even a cabinet member. It's got to be an officer. So I still don't understand what we're scrutinising. Are we saying that an officer shouldn't do that? Are you suggesting that we might be thinking an officer shouldn't be doing that?
I think my suggestion would be that we would be putting forward recommendations about how it is done, not whether it is done. You know, there might be things in the way that things are delegated, in the timelines over which they're delegated, in the financial amounts over which they're delegated, where scrutiny may wish to express a view. Obviously, this is regarding legal agreements, so it could be that, for example, Cabinet is proposing that the officer have a limit of one amount of money to which they can go in making those legal agreements. We might want to propose an alternative amount of money. So I don't think it's so much, we're not a decision-making committee. What we can do is put forward the view of scrutiny around what Cabinet should think about doing. As a critical friend, exactly.
Suppose I'm worrying that sounds like quite a lot of technicalities. If you're talking about how much money is spent on this, that I'm not sure we could possibly have any sort of anything we could say would be more that you would assume the expertise is in the officers, for instance. What I don't want us to be doing is open up going back over decisions that have already been made, contentious as they might have been, they've been made. Just seems to be that you're suggesting the report says an officer go on and do it. I don't really think we should be making recommendations about how long it's going to take, how much money. That's way beyond our expertise. Just as a danger that we start talking about something that's already been decided. It's quite a lengthy process. You know, it's been through quite a lot of processes. I wasn't involved in any of them. I'm not clear what the report says that we can effectively scrutinise.
If you don't mind, Chair, through you. Yes, you're absolutely correct, Councillor Tino. Without properly looking at the report, we don't know exactly what type of recommendation the committee might be able to come up with. But at this point, it is just an opportunity for the committee to discuss this item if it wishes to. It doesn't have to agree to it if it doesn't. If it feels like it's a waste of time to consider this report in August.
Thank you.
I mean, in that case, I would rely on you, Chair, to be very strict about the fact that we're not going back over old ground and that it genuinely is, the matters we're looking at are something that we actually can contribute to, which I feel slightly sceptical. It sounds like quite technical stuff that maybe some of us know, but I doubt that we really do have any expertise over.
Thank you, Councillor Tino. Councillor Miles?
Yeah, I mean, we had an example this last year where there was a call in around a decision, and ultimately we, as Scrutiny, did agree with the cabinet decision that had been made, but as a mechanism, it's not frequently used, but it is something that we, I think, given the balance of power of the council at the moment, it's within, very legitimate for us to use it. What would be useful if this were to be reflected on is maybe to consider the wider remit, not just around specifically the report that is before us, but have there been any lessons learned through the entire process around this bridge? And the reason why I say this is because the money that was actually allocated from the Great Deal to support this was redirected from other projects which could have already been implemented now. And so there are some lessons learned, I think, that we could retrospectively look at. And then also I understand it was subject to judicial review. So again, lessons learned related to that how could the council better have managed these processes if it did want, obviously political decision, not one we all agree with, but to have made the decision it did without having the cost to council that it has incurred, and also the loss of other projects that could have already been implemented, which has put this project at a higher cost as a result. And so, there are lessons learned. So I would support your consideration of it within that remit, more as a scrutiny reflection and not just the cabinet item.
Thank you, Councillor Miles. Councillor Rotino?
I mean, as interesting as that sounds, that already sounds going beyond scrutinising what is going to be in this report, which is about delegating powers to an officer. That sounds like another report we might want to ask for in the future, which we then scrutinise. So the report that the points that you're making aren't going to be in this report, are they? This is all going to be technical stuff. Officer Y, X does Y. So I think if, I'm not objecting to what Catherine's suggesting, but that's not scrutinising this report. That's asking for another report which is yet to be written about the learning process. And we have that, but that's not going to be done by the next meeting. That's something that can go on our long list. And it could apply to other similar decisions, I guess, about infrastructure.
Thank you very much. Thank you both for your views on this. I mean, so I guess my steer here would be, of course, that this is on the Cabinet's forward plan as of this afternoon. We don't yet know the content of the paper, so we are effectively facing a choice over whether we put it on the agenda as something we can consider or we don't, and we won't actually know exactly what they are asking us to or asking themselves to decide upon until after this moment to put it on our agenda has passed. I think given that there is disagreement, it would be sensible to put this to a vote. I don't think necessarily we're going to reach a consensus. So would colleagues be happy to put it to a vote? Could all of those in favour of calling this in, please show their hands. And those against? Thank you very much. I see a clear vote in favour of bringing this onto our work plan, and this will come to the August meeting. Thank you very much for the debate on the matter, though I do recognise your points, Councillor Rotino. I think it's a complicated one, and we will need to think carefully about the remit, but it is an important thing that this committee considers something that's been of such significance to many people across the city. Okay, so just in terms of the work plan, Celeste has looked at our long list of items. So I'm going to pass over to Celeste to talk about our long list of items. after she has completed, I think we might also want to think about one of them, which is the tourist tax, because I think we heard the only plausible, legally possible at this moment interpretation of that today, and we might therefore want to consider it complete. Celeste?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, and appreciate your points, Councillor Tino. Yep, those are noted as well. Yeah, in terms of the long list of suggested topics, just to say that we have added 9 new item suggestions to this long list. If the committee is happy to agree those suggestions, we can start liaising with the cabinet members or officers that are relevant to those report to commission and try to pencil them into the work program. Just to name a few that were suggested, the local government reform, holistic provision for public facilities in the city, repair maintenance processes for parks, highways, HRA lands, nighttime economy. But there's further suggestions to those aforementioned. Each of those items was given a score based on the topic criteria that was presented to yourselves in at the beginning of the year as part of the operating principles. To clarify, the scores do not actually determine the order in which these items will be programmed into the scrutiny work plan, but they do give very valuable guidance on which, on which items the committee would want to pursue further. So if the committee has any further suggestions, please, email them to me. And as ever, any further changes to the work plan or the long list will be consulted with the chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Tino.
So can you explain the scoring? Does the TOPIC mean something?
Yes, certainly, Councillor Tino. Let me just pull that up here. Essentially, topic scoring, this is abbreviated to, for example, T means timing, O is how relevant it is to the organization, P is, pardon me, I don't have it right in front of me just yet, but I'll get there eventually.
Just while Celeste is looking at that, just to flag up, obviously, we will need to agree the long list of items. So if colleagues did have anything they wanted to raise, we could take that while Celeste looks. Catherine.
Yeah, so something that has come up through various licensing committees recently is perhaps capacity constraints in the environmental health team, and wonder whether we could do something a bit of a deeper dive on environmental health, on how it works, and whether they have the resources to be able to effectively implement their function. Thank you.
Yeah, that definitely sounds like a sensible thing to put onto the work plan. That will have been captured in the minutes, and we can pick that one up. Have you got the topic there?
Yes,
Please.
thank you. Thank you for your patience. Yeah, so T, if it's timely, that's criteria. O, Oxford priority. P, public interest. I, influence. And C, cost. There's descriptions to what these actually mean for the information on those and scores given. So between myself, the chair, and the vice chair, we've averaged out. We've each scored each of these items and averaged out a totaling score for them, and that's what you see in front of you. If you so wish, Councillor Tino or the committee, I could reshare the topic criteria to everybody to clarify. Yeah.
So I'll presume people have looked at the list in advance. Are people happy broadly to agree to the long list? Brilliant. Do we need to formally vote on that one? So let's go check with you.
Everyone is generally happy with the suggested items, yes? Yep.
Yeah, I saw everyone nod, so I think we'll call that unanimous. Thank you very much. So the last thing we need to do is give a report back on the recommendations. So we made 5 recommendations to Cabinet, which met on the 18th of June. All were either agreed in part or in full. So recommendation 1 around the accuracy of the data, which was basically that they should make a baseline estimate to cover for the missing data, and then also report back in 12 months' time, in 6 months' time, was partially agreed in that they agreed to make a best estimate of the missing data, but felt that 12 months would be a better timeline. So we got the data, we did not get the timeframe we wanted, but generally I think there was broad agreement with that proposal, and I at least am reasonably happy that at least they're going to backfill the data, which will make those KPIs much more meaningful. The second recommendation was around link site. So we had a full response from Cabinet detailing Serco's license agreement with Linksite for ongoing remote support. So there is a contract in place. There is a note there and a series of links to Serco's procurement procedures, as well as their respect for human rights. I think they have responded to that, but I would like to check with Councillor Mundy as the proposer if you were also happy with that response.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. So moving on to our responses on the local plan. Again, we had one which was agreed in full and another which was agreed in part. Specifically on cycle parking, we got agreement from Cabinet. They are going to speak to the County Council during or at the same time as the Regulation 18 consultation. So we won't see the new figures for bike parking in that, but they will then look at whether they can be increased ahead of the Regulation 19 consultation. So that was agreed with. Then the other item we raised was around the wording of policies HDB8 and HDB9 around densification. We got an in-part agreement to this, basically with Cabinet noting that they felt the policies themselves were already clear, but that they acknowledged that the surrounding wording was potentially not as strong as it could be, and they will again redraft this while the Regulation 18 consultation is ongoing ahead of the Regulation 19 consultation. So again, effectively, they are doing what we asked for, which is great. The final one was on the annual complaint performance and service improvement report. We had one recommendation around future reports, including benchmarking data from local housing providers. This was agreed to. So basically, of our 5 recommendations, most of them were agreed to in substance, which is great. The last thing we need to do is to look at the recommendations from working groups. And I'm going to pass over to Celeste to detail the recommendations.
Yes, happy to provide a brief summary. The Housing and Homelessness Working Group met on the 24th of June. Since this is period since the last committee has met, and they considered 2 reports: the future of the National Homelessness Property Fund. There were no recommendations agreed based on that report, but they were supportive of the officer recommendation option to roll over the council investments to an open-ended fund in September. The second report that they considered was the annual review of the housing, homelessness and rough sleeping strategy. They agreed 2 recommendations, which are part of the supplement published last week. So one, for Cabinet to continue to lobby against changes to local government funding used to support homelessness services, particularly those changes that would result in significant reductions. The second recommendation is for Council to explore measures to protect its tenants from revenge evictions until the time that the Renters' Rights Bill is passed. But yeah, the committee is being asked to endorse these recommendations, and then we can advance them to Cabinet for response. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any comments from the committee? Seeing none, are we happy to endorse those recommendations? Excellent. Thank you very much. That concludes our business for the evening. It's been a very hot and quite a long meeting, so thank you very much, colleagues, for all of your questions, and I hope everyone is able to keep cool this evening when they get